Hello, my name's Rahim, and these are the worst books that I bothered to read this year. Hello friends! First things first, I apologise if this video gets darker and darker. It is like 2:15 in the afternoon in January in the south of England, which means we don't have that much sunlight left, and also the clouds are coming in. And it will probably rain at some point soon, but this is the only time I got, so we've got to do it now. As I said in my last video, which was my best books of 2020, which I will leave in the cards above if you haven't seen it yet, I am now filming my worst books and DNFs of 2020. So I have 5 books that I gave 1 star that I'm going to talk to you about, and then I also have 9 books that I DNF'd. I thought I'd put these two together because, oh, it is raining. It is already raining. There you go. I thought I would put these two together because 5 books just didn't seem like enough to rant about, and some of the 2 stars were just 2 stars because they were not my style rather than anything else. I also had some books that were disappointing, but I'm going to talk to you about all of those things in my 2020 survey. There's a 2020 survey and a 2020 stats video coming your way soon, so there will be lots of talk about the books I liked and didn't like coming up to your way. But first, let's get to these books. I'm going to start with the DNFs. The first book that I DNF'd this year was Selected Poems of Rumi. And the reason I DNF'd this was because Rumi is a Persian Sufi mystic poet from the 13th century. And I feel like I am inadequate. I am not educated enough in this area to fully understand and appreciate Rumi. I picked this book up because I see a lot of quotes of Rumi just floating around the internet, and I thought some of them sounded beautiful, so I wanted to try it out. But I do feel like when something is that old and from an entirely different culture, an education around them can be really valuable in helping you to properly appreciate them. I didn't properly appreciate Greek tragedies until I studied classics at university, and I think the same is true for Rumi's poetry. So while it might be incredibly beautiful, as someone who is completely unaware of Sufi mysticism, of much Islamic history at all, to be perfectly honest, of 13th century Persia, all of this made me feel inadequate and like I would need to study it in order to gain a true appreciation for what I'm sure is incredibly beautiful work. I'm going to turn the light on. I'm not sure if this is entirely better, but it's the best I've got for now because it was getting so dark out there because it is pouring with rain. The next book I DNF'd was Descendants of the Crane by Joan, which is a Chinese-inspired fantasy. I believe it's YA, and so, I mean, probably it was my own fault for attempting to pick up a YA fantasy because that's not my genre at all. I don't read much fantasy and I don't read much YA. However, I wanted something escapist, something fun, something adventurous, and this just wasn't that. Princess Hesina of Yan has always been eager to shirk the responsibilities of the crown. But when her beloved father is murdered, she is thrust into power, suddenly the queen of an unstable kingdom. Determined to find her father's killer, Hesina does something desperate. She enlists the aid of a soothsayer, a treacherous act punishable by death. This book had so much setup. Like, there wasn't an adventure, there was just a lot of setup, and it didn't feel like fun, mythic setup, this is a myth, this is so magical and fairy tale. It felt like I was reading very dry history, and then also a, like, typical YA romance thrust into that as well. It felt like it really clashed and didn't get on with each other, and I didn't feel like this novel was particularly strong or particularly well written at all. From what I remember, the writing was really melodramatic, and not in a fun way. Then I tried to read Don't Worry, It Gets Worse by Alida Nugent, and again I think this was probably my fault for trying to read a book that was aimed at people much younger than myself and also published in 2012 or 2013 or something like that, and so for the type of book it was, it dates pretty quickly. This is a story about Alida Nugent's experience being a 20-something emerging into the workforce. However, it's supposed to be funny, and it's really not funny. It is very much stuck in a 2012 Tumblr comedy zone, which I think was only funny for people who were really absorbed into that section. It just didn't work for me. It was problematic in terms of who it was laughing at. It was particularly repetitive and boring, like there was nothing new or interesting that it brought to the conversation. It was just pretty much exactly what you would expect from a privileged 20-something emerging into the workforce, and I didn't feel like it gave me anything, and so I gave up on reading it. Another book that I DNF'd was Trouble the Saints by Alida Dawn Johnson, and this one I was kind of more disappointed with than just thought it was a rubbish book or a not for me book. This one had so much potential. This is again a fantasy book, but a historical fantasy set in Harlem during the 1940s about a woman who is a trained assassin, a hired assassin. And it is kind of a film, it's kind of a noir book written with that kind of 1940s noir sensibility. And in this book, the fantasy element is that black people have hands, which is the name for a special talent that is given to them by their ancestors in order to kind of repay the traumas that were enacted upon black people and other people of colour. And it was a good premise, and I thought that the noir atmosphere was done really well. It definitely felt really real, but I felt like the plot was a mixture of very confusing and very melodramatic. Like, nothing was happening, but everyone was sort of really intense and really intensely telling you their feelings, and everything was so important, but nothing was happening. And I don't mind books where nothing happens, but at least be upfront about it. Stop pretending there's so much drama involved, because it really didn't feel like there was. It was also really confusing. Like, I had no idea who most of the people were, why they were doing anything. And a lot of the time, people critique my favourite books by saying they're really confused about what's going on. And so I kind of understand where those people are coming from when it comes to this book, because I was just so confused. Like, why do we care? And then I read a synopsis of it and I was like, okay, I have understood what's going on. These people are just being so melodramatic compared to what's actually going on. And like, the reveals are happening way too early in the book. So now what's going on, I don't know. Things are jumping forward in time. It just felt really confused and didn't properly hang together. Right back at the beginning of the year, I tried to read Notes from a Small Island by Bryson, and I didn't get anywhere fast. I really wanted to love Bill Bryson. I read Mother Tongue by Bill Bryson, like, God, it must be at least 15 years ago now, and I really remember really enjoying it. It was the history of the English language, and I thought it was really good at the time. And my dad loves Bill Bryson, and loads of people love Bill Bryson. He's basically a national treasure, even though he's not actually from here. He just writes a lot about the UK. He's a travel writer. He writes a lot about different places, but Notes from a Small Island is his story of travelling around the UK before he moved back to the States. And it follows his history and then talks about the town. But I just found it so tedious, so incredibly tedious. There was one piece of interest, which was about the strikes at the Times in the 1980s, or 70s, which I found really interesting, and a period of history I would like to learn more about. The rest of it was just a lot of complaining. Like, it's so funny that this is so terrible. I'm going to whine about this for 3 pages, and it's going to be repetitive and the same because it's raining and I've walked too far. I've decided to walk this far even though I can't actually walk this far, and I didn't realise how far it was, and I'm wet. And that's the whole book, and it was supposed to be hysterically funny. There was also a lot of fat shaming, like a lot of fat shaming. It really, really started to grate on me just how much fat shaming there was in this book. And it just felt very middle-aged man. Like, if you like Jeremy Clarkson, then you're probably going to like Bill Bryson. That's what it felt like to me. Anyway, so I gave up on it because I don't like Jeremy Clarkson. Then I tried to read Ordinary People by Diana Evans, which is a piece of commercial fiction, I guess, contemporary fiction about 2 couples in England in 2008. It starts with the election of Barack Obama, and they're out at this party, and then it kind of follows their lives. One of the couples had moved into a house in Lower Sydenham, which is so close to Crystal Palace. The party's actually in Crystal Palace, which is where I'm from, and that's the main reason I picked up this book, was because it had pictures of the transition tower from Crystal Palace on the cover, and I was like, yeah, I want to read a book about where I'm from. But it was about this couple in their 30s who've had 2 children, and the passion has gone out of their marriage, and then this other couple between a black man and a white woman, and become a suburban husband with children, and is living this really suburban life, and he doesn't like it. He wants to be an artist, and he doesn't really feel like he's truly understood, and his life's kind of wasted. And I just don't think middle-class, middle-aged moaning is for me, even if it's set in Crystal Palace, even if it's about black people instead of white people, which this book was, so there was a different edge to it. This man who's nearly going to cheat on his wife because he wants to be John Legend, I don't care. I just don't care about you. I couldn't bring myself to care about the people in this novel, and so I gave up on it. One that I DNF'd very recently, and I have not talked about at all on this channel yet, is The Duke and I by Julia Quinn. I was planning this whole video where I read the first 4 books in the Bridgerton series, and then I watched Bridgerton on Netflix, and I talked to you about it because I started to get into historical romance a bit last year, and I thought that looks really fun. I think this would be a fun, like, in between Christmas and New Year project for me. Until I read The Duke and I, and the writing wasn't great. The writing of romance novels is never is not the same as reading literary fiction, and you can't want it to be. But it can be fun, and you can feel the chemistry between the characters, and you can enjoy that aspect of it. and you can like the characters or whatever. But I didn't in this one. They were just spoilt, boring, rich people. And I didn't like that aspect of it. And I didn't feel any chemistry between the main characters. The reason I thought it would be fun was because I enjoy humour in my historical romance. That's what I've learned about myself. And I was told that Julia Quinn was really witty and funny, and that I thought that aspect of it would be good. But it wasn't funny at all. I could see where the jokes were meant to be, but they just felt really flat to me. But I kept going. I persevered because I thought, I've heard the other ones later are better, the other ones in the series are better later, and even though I'm not loving the writing of this, I can see how it would make a fun TV programme. And then the woman rapes her husband. And it's not addressed in the book. And I had to give up. I was so angry. I was so upset. I spent the rest of the afternoon reading about Bridgerton and sexual assault in Bridgerton and trying to, like, see if it was left out or changed in the TV series, see if it changed throughout the books, if it became addressed in any way. Apparently, Julia Quinn writes a lot about consent in the later Bridgerton books, and she does a really good job of it. And this controversial scene is something that lots of people have talked about and written about, and it was kept in the series. And I just felt like I couldn't continue with the project anymore because I lost all the interest and heart in it, to be honest with you, and I haven't read any of the others. Like, it would be enough if it was just mediocrely written, I would have continued, but it was mediocrely written and there was a rape. That was not addressed or thought of as a rape. It's like, if the husband did that to the wife, I cannot imagine it being treated that way. So, I gave up on that. Another one I gave up on because of uncomfortable sexual scenes, but in an entirely different way. And for one, I will not compare the writer to. It's very different. But that is Big Girl, Small Town by Michelle Gallen, which tells the story of Magella, who is an autistic girl growing up in a small town in Northern Ireland in the 1990s. And her dad went missing in the Troubles, and she works at a chip shop. And it's kind of about her life. And it's I only read the beginning of it, so I don't know how it develops. But it is very depressing. It is very depressing, and obviously that premise sounds depressing, and so I have no problem with that, but there was not really a lot of hope in it. And then also, like, her grandma is murdered at the beginning, and that's kind of the story. But there is also a lot of sexual scenes that happen in this book, and they made me incredibly uncomfortable, and they are meant to make you uncomfortable. Like, they are written in a way that is uncomfortable and very unsexy, and that is fine. That is what the book is meant to do. But it is not a headspace I was in at the time. So I can't really blame the book for this. This book might be an excellent book. It might be a book that is for you. But the way that the discomfort with the sex scenes, I couldn't handle it at that point that I was reading it. It might be one that I pick up again later because it was definitely well written. And Northern Irish fiction is something that I want to read more of. As someone, my mum is from Derry. And fiction from the north of Ireland, I feel like, is not that well publicised a lot of the time, so I want to read more of it, but unfortunately those uncomfortable sex scenes, I just couldn't manage it. And then the final one that I DNF'd is another romance novel, and that is A Princess in Theory by Alissa Cole. Apparently all the uncomfortable sex scenes have come at the end of this list of DNFs. A Princess in Theory tells the story of this woman who is a biologist, and I think she's doing something to do with cancer. Honestly can't remember, it was a while ago that I read this book, or read most of this book, 2/3 maybe. She's getting all these emails to say that she is betrothed to this prince of a fictional African country, and she doesn't believe it until one day he shows up at her door pretending to be someone else, and they build a relationship together. They have sex while he is pretending to be someone else. That is sexual assault. She doesn't know who he is. She doesn't consent to have sex with the person that he really is. So that was enough to put me off. But then also, this is not the only book that I've read this year that does this, but why are thick fingers supposed to be sexy? I've talked about this in other videos, but thick fingers makes me think of Prince Charles, particularly this picture of Prince Charles. And so it's a really unsexy descriptor. Like, I know why girth is supposed to be sexy, but in the finger department, I think we might leave thick out as a descriptor because it just makes me feel gross. Really, really gross. The fact she discovers who he is, she ends up going to the country, and we're only 2/3 of the way through the book. Like, the plot of this novel, the pacing of this novel, I don't understand. It was terrible. The pacing just made no sense. And I didn't really buy the chemistry between the two main characters either. So overall, I just found it a dud, and I didn't finish it. So finally we come to the 5 worst books that I actually managed to finish in 2020. And these are in absolutely no particular order. I think they're actually just in reverse order of when I read them, so the most recent to the one I read at the beginning of the year. I wonder if you know any of those. If you do think you know what are the 5 worst books that I read this year that I actually finished, pause the video and let me know in the comments what you think is going to be on this list. I think at least one of them I've ranted about enough times for you to possibly know. Other ones I think I haven't talked about that much, so I would be interested to know if you can guess what they are. First one here, the most recent one I read for the Goodreads Historical Fiction Awards, which I did a whole vlog of and will leave in the cards above. And that is the Book of Lost Names. Literally can't remember who it's by because I hated it so much. Kristen Harmel. Well, I will avoid her books in the future. The Book of Lost Names tells the story of this mother and daughter who are living in Paris in the 1930s, when the 1940s, when the Nazis are occupying France, and they are Jewish. And at the beginning of the novel, her father gets taken by the Nazis, or by the French police, who are collaborating with the Nazis. And so they escape to the south of France, and she has created forgeries in order to enable them to escape to the south of France. So she gets recruited by the resistance to make forgeries for them. There is a random romance thrown in, which has no chemistry whatsoever. This writer knows nothing about Judaism, which seems weird when you're writing a book about Jewish people during the Holocaust. It seems to romanticise the Second World War and the Holocaust as a huge adventure. It's just so poorly written. The writing felt amateur to me. It felt really poor, and I really didn't enjoy the writing of it. I often struggle with World War II fiction, with Holocaust fiction in particular. I feel like there's a lot of it that is not, makes me feel a bit queasy, the romanticisation of that era, the treatment of it as an adventure. And I get that I have read a lot of books about tragedies, and I have enjoyed a lot of books about tragedies equally terrible to the Holocaust, and enjoyed those books, but I feel like it's probably because of the plethora of books about this time period, which is not so true of other tragedies, which means that there's a lot of unskilled, disrespectful, I would consider, works about it, less so about other tragedies. Another of the worst books that I read this year was the Mitford Murders by Jessica Fellowes. I read this for my 6 weeks, 6 genres challenge, which I'll leave in the cards above, when I was reading cozy mystery for a week, and this was neither cozy nor mysterious. This tells the story of a murder that happens on a train, and this servant girl who was on the train as well and ends up trying to investigate the murder along with the policeman, and she works for the Mitfords. She ends up working for the Mitfords. Nancy Mitford, who was a famous writer, and they were all famous socialites. The Mitford's connection here is so clearly in order to sell the book that there is nothing really Mitford related about it, except that it's set there, and they use some of the same family slang that is used in Nancy Mitford's books, but the fact of them actually being Mitfords adds nothing to this story whatsoever, and that really annoyed me. There is blatant whitewashing of the Mitfords as well. They're seen as this cute, cosy, quirky family, not literal Nazis. I mean, not all of them were literal Nazis, but at least the father and 2 of the sisters were literal Nazis. And so it just grates on me the way that was so swept under the rug. It's also one of those books that tries to make it out that in the 1920s, rich families just loved their servants, and they just were best friends with their servants, and it was just being best friends, really. You just hung out at their house and were best friends. I just feel like the historical element of this was so ridiculous, and the mystery was stupid. I didn't care. There was no interest in the mystery at all. It was really boring. So yeah, I definitely would not recommend this. Another one that I read for my 6 weeks, 6 genres challenge was one that I read during Thriller Week, where I read The Woman in the Window by AJ Finn. This was a thriller that was entirely without thrill. It tells the story of a woman who is a kind of a hermit. She lives in her house, she doesn't go out, and she is an alcoholic, and so she's an unreliable narrator. She sees through her window a violent attack, but nobody believes her because of how unreliable she is, and because she's been watching people through her window, which is weird. And she is an alcoholic as well. She's also obsessed with classic movies, so she's obviously reenacting Rear Window, basically, but there are other classic movies and other classic movie references throughout. There is no plot for the first 2/3 of the book. Nothing happens. It is incredibly slow and dull and boring. There's 2 twists. One of the twists, I was like, didn't you already told this to us? There was a scene where it became this big reveal, and I was like, I swear we already knew this. I don't understand why it's being said as a big reveal when we've known this all along. I thought it was very easy to infer. And then the second twist, I was like, it hadn't happened yet, and there was a quote from one of the classic movies, and I was like, that's just giving away who the violence person is, who the murderer is, or whatever. Not really a murder. Anyway, you've just given away the whole twist, very obviously, very clearly, and then it ends with a villain monologue on a roof in the rain and someone being pushed through a window. I was like, is this a satire? Is this a satire of thrillers? Because if it is, it's a really boring satire. So overall, yeah, I would definitely not recommend it. It is boring, it is predictable, it is obvious, and it is written by a man who has been known to be incredibly devious. He is in fact a famous liar. Which was a really fun read, actually. If you want to read the New York Times article about A.J. Finn, I will leave that in the description because that was interesting. Next we have The Opposite of Always by Justin A. Reynolds. This is another one where it is potentially because I decided to read a YA romance, a Groundhog Day YA romance, and YA romance is not really my genre. This tells the story of Jack, who meets this girl and he falls in love with her, but she has a condition. I think she has sickle cell anemia, but I could be misremembering. And she dies, and then he goes back to the start where they met and lives through those months over and over again, trying to save her. There was a couple of scenes of cute banter between the two characters, and I think that was well done. But it was the only thing that was well done. This book was so melodramatic, unrealistic, and obviously, like, Groundhog Day doesn't happen, obviously, but it was the relationships between the characters that were so inconsistent. The characters would just say whatever was necessary for the scene, even if it seemed really unfitting for that character to be saying that. It was so melodramatic. There was so much, like, intense melodrama, which maybe is because it is a teen book for teens and it's not for me, who rolls my eyes at that sort of thing. But it was really the ending of this book that really let it down. It was like almost and I woke up and it was all a dream kind of an ending. There was no follow through. It was really, really an easy cop-out of an ending, and I thought that really let it down. This ending was not at all earned. It was like, I've written 300 pages, probably should end it now, wrap it up. And I thought that was so disappointing. I was like, this feels like absolutely no effort has been made at the end of this book, and you've really let yourself down. And then finally, one that I read in the beginning of the year, A Small Revolution in Germany by Phillip Hensher. Phillip Hensher is talked about as one of the best living British writers, so I wanted to read this book. It was about these people who, in a northern town in the 1970s, who become obsessed with leftist politics and want to be leftist radicals, and they end up flower bombing a Conservative speaker, I believe, and then they all kind of drift away and go into different directions. It's kind of about how their life pans out in the future, with the main character being the only one who sticks to his beliefs throughout the course of the novel. And he goes to Germany, he goes to East Germany whilst it is under Soviet rule, and then goes back again after the fall of the Soviet Union, like in the current day times. I thought that this novel was kind of boring, meandering, felt like 4 different novels kind of shoved together, but it was all right. There was definitely skill in the writing. There was one perspective that was between a woman and between a sort of socialite woman and a man who ends up working as a politician, as the Chancellor, I believe, and kind of their experience at Oxford that was really like dark academia and interesting, and I really wanted to read that novel that was shoved in among all these other novels. But apart from that, I didn't think it really hung together that well. But what really set this down as a terrible book, or as a book that I can't in all good conscience recommend, is that at the end of this book, the main character, Spike, is gay, and he goes to this LGBT group, and there is a confrontation between lesbians and a trans woman at this group, and the boyfriend of the main character, Spike, punches this trans woman in the face and crows about it, and they're like, it's constantly misgenders and talks about how this person is terrible and invading space and invading womanhood, and it is crowed about and seen like, obviously actions of violence against trans women can happen in books without making the book transphobic, but that was not in this book. That was seen to be a good thing. Like, the world had gone mad in believing that trans people exist and are valid, and it was really disappointing. It really shocked me. I didn't see it coming. It was such a throwaway part of the book, and it was so really disappointing and really bad, and it made me feel bad that I talked about this book so much, because I had leading up to that. And yeah, so that was why it made it onto this worst books of 2020 video for me. I'm hoping I will not read books like that again, and I will definitely not be reading anything else from Phillip Hensher. Thank you for watching. That is all of the terrible books. I hope I have expanded on them in a way that was interesting and entertaining, at least. I hope you should know which books to avoid. Unless any of these sounded incredibly interesting because you love things that I hate, I would love to hear that. If you are interested in reading any of these books after hearing me pan them, I would love to hear what you have to say in the comments below. And what was the worst book you read this year? I would also love it if you feel like having a little rant away in the comments. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like this video if you liked it, and I put out new videos every Wednesday, Friday and Sunday, so I will definitely see you again soon. Bye bye!